Hi there. So let's talk about part 19, alright? So what we have here essentially is that part 19 came about because we had a patron and he mentioned that there are a couple of problems with our code all the way up to part 18 so far. Let me just show you the code and you can see what I mean. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna fill up my inventory slots, and you will find that once I max out all my inventory slots, right, I will not be able to pick up new items, which of course is a problem. So do you see that once I get 6 passives, I still have new passives showing up, and this is not good because I'm clicking on the wings now, but it's not registering at all, which this is one of the issues we have. Second issue we have, okay, I'm gonna just max out my knife over here and I'm just gonna level up. You see that? So once you max out a weapon, sometimes a slot goes missing, and the reason it goes missing is because of the way our apply upgrade options is coded inside our play inventory. Let me just show you the code and I'll explain to you what I mean. So inside play inventory, we have the apply upgrade options, and this function here basically is responsible for filling up the level up screen when our character levels up. We have a bunch of available weapons, available passives, and these two are arrays, and then you just fill in all the passives that you want your player to be able to have, and you fill in all the weapons that you want your player to be able to have, and then it'll just select a number of weapons and passives and show it on the level up screen. So the reason why we have these bugs is because our logic is a little bit off, and we can go through the code together to see this. Okay, so how apply upgrade options works is essentially it gets all the available weapon upgrades and all the available passive upgrades. It makes a duplicate of the list from available weapons and available passives right here. Once it does so, right, it loops through all the upgrade options. Upgrade options are the variables that you have over here. Okay, if you recall, in part 12 of this series, we created these upgrade options on the level up screen. So each of the boxes here is an upgrade option, and then if you recall, there are 4 options inside each of the buttons, and then these will be the background, the description, the name, and the option button. So what the play inventory does is that it will loop through, because we have 4 upgrade options here, right? Okay, you loop through all of these options here, and then it will fill up the name of the weapon, the description, and the icon of the weapon. And of course, it will arm the button. This whole box over here, this is the button. It arms the button with an action to either level up the weapon or add a new weapon to the player character. So we changed this in part 15 as well when we revamped the weapon system. But there are still some quirks with it because the logic is largely from the old system, right? So what's happening here in this system is that once we get a list of all available weapons and passives, we do not check whether these weapons and passives are eligible because they don't change, right? This list is always the same. But then if you max out a weapon, for example, it shouldn't be available anymore. Or if you max out your inventory slots, it also shouldn't be available anymore. But then the problem is that these options are still available, and it's because we do not check whether these are eligible weapons or not. So we just look through the whole thing and we see whether there are any more available weapons. If there are no available weapons or available passives, then we will just stop doing the apply upgrade options. Otherwise, we will randomly pick an upgrade type of either 2 or 1. So whenever we add a passive or a weapon onto the level up screen, then what's gonna happen is that we'll remove it from this list so that we don't have duplicates. We won't have like knife, garlic or something. Alright, so this basically just prevents weapon options from repeating themselves, but by and large we don't check whether any of the conditions are, for example, if the weapon is max level or something, which is a big problem. Alright, we just right away after we get all our available weapons and available passives, we just drop them into the upgrade screen. And then one thing that is very clunky about how we implement this is, if you see over here, there's a piece of code here that basically checks whether the weapon is at max level. And if it's at max level, what we'll just do is turn off the button. Disable upgrade UI is a function that basically turns off the button right here. So if we run across a weapon that is max level, we just turn off the option, which is why sometimes there will be a slot missing, and that's because that is max level, it just shuts itself off. So this has a problem also that if everything is maxed out, then you will just show the upgrade screen without anything in there, and then your game just hangs if you max out everything, which is a problem, right? So you have 2 problems over here. Your slots are missing when your weapon is maxed out, and then also you have new weapons that sometimes you're not able to select because you have no more inventory slots. And then this is what we set out to fix with part 19, and this cascaded into a whole bunch of other issues. But before I move on to that, let's just talk about the new function and what changes are applied to this new function. Right, so instead of checking, or rather instead of having no checks, okay, what's going to happen here is that first we combine everything into a single list. So if you remember from part 15, right, when we created weapons and passives, right, and then both of them are items. So both of them can be treated either as items or separately as weapons and passives, because item is a superclass, right? So what's going on here is that in this new function, instead of treating them as weapons and passives, we are treating everything as an item. The reason for that is because if you look at the old function, right, you will have two branches in the code. Okay, one for upgrade type 1, which is if we random and we select a weapon, and then we will show a weapon upgrade. Otherwise, if we randomly select a passive, and then we will show the passive upgrade. And the codes are more or less the same, so we are just repeating a piece of code twice, which makes the function unusually long. So in this new recode, we are setting out to make the function shorter as well and more readable, on top of course fixing these bugs. So we combine everything into something called available upgrades, and then we have all upgrades over here. So available upgrades is going to be the filtered list, and all upgrades is gonna be the all the options, you know. So over here we have a list of all available weapons, and we add all available passives into all upgrades as well. And this will be all the available upgrades that we have. And then we check whether we have any weapon slots left or any passive slots left, and we just count the number of slots over here. Okay, once that's done, right, we will just loop through all our items and all upgrades, and then we will check for a couple of things. We will check if the item is at maximum level. If it is not, then we will add this to available upgrades. Or if the weapon, or rather the item that we select is a weapon, then we will check whether there are any more weapon slots. If there are, then we will add this to the available upgrades. And then we will check if the item is otherwise a passive, and if it's a passive and there are passive slots left, then we will add this to the available upgrades. So you see we have these two layers of checks, right, to make sure that whatever option that shows up in the upgrade screen is a valid option, so that, you know, we won't get missing buttons. All right, we don't want to shut off button when we find that it's max level later on. All right, we want to just do a thorough check first before we actually populate these upgrades into the level up screen. So after that, we of course loop through all the upgrade options, and then we will just populate all the options inside. This whole part here will be replaced later on, but the logic here is essentially the same as before. The difference is only that right now, you know, we have a filter, so then we, instead of having anything else, we just run this block of code once. Okay, this block of code here is very similar to the block of code that you see right above here, where we have two branches. Yeah, it's the same thing. So you can see more of the thought process if you want to in this linked post over here. You can find the link in the description below. So because of this, right, what we did was we recoded the apply upgrade options, and then along that line we also created a couple of new functions for the play inventory script. And the reason we did that is because firstly we have to have a function to count number of slots, because previously we didn't have that, which is why we didn't check whether we have enough slots before we offered a new upgrade. And second, we also created a new level up function that allows us to level up an item. And there are two ways you can do that. You can either offer an item as an argument, or you can offer an item data. What's the difference between an item and an item data? If you recall, an item is basically an instance of an item data. So for example, you have knife, right? Okay, so the knife has its own level up information, its own data, so as to speak, right? Okay, it has growth data and all that stuff, all inside the weapon data. Okay, this is item data, right? Because weapon data is a subclass of an item data. So the weapon data or the item data, whatever, it stores all the level up information of the item, and then the item itself is, you know, for example, if you have a knife weapon on player 1, that's an item. And then if you have multiple players, then you have multiple copies of that item, right? Okay, so when you level up something, you can either offer the item variable or you can offer the item data. And if you offer the item variable, because the item variable is what stores the level information, right, it just tries to level up the item. Okay, so what we have here is essentially we added a couple of new functions, and over here the level up function is overloaded, which means that we offer two definitions of it so that you can do the level up using different kinds of variable types. So for now, we are just, if I'm not wrong, in our code we are attaching the level up function, and then it uses the item version of the level up. So we're just adding one more function here to level up, and the level up function is there to replace the old level up function, because in the old level up function we have level up weapon and then level up passive. And then what it does is that it takes the slot index and the upgrade index, which is a little convoluted, because what we want to do is when you level up something, you previously had to specify what slot it is in, and that was a little bit cumbersome. So what we did instead was we recoded the level up function so that it takes the item variable instead, and it just level ups the item variable right away. Okay, so it makes everything simpler, and because the functions are not divided between level up passive item and level up weapon, so then we can use the same level up function for both weapons and passives, which again allows us to, unify both the leveling up process of weapons and passives, which is why again we're able to code everything by representing these things as items instead of as weapons or passives. So this level up function here is just there to allow us to handle the leveling up easier, and then we have an overload here which is currently not used, but allows you to use an item data to level up a specific copy of an item inside the inventory as well. This is just there for convenience at the moment. So we have added two functions essentially, the get slots left and then the level up function right here. Okay, and this allows our new apply upgrade options function to work. And the other thing that we did was we also did a minor bug fix over here in the get function inside the play inventory script. Okay, let me just explain how this works. Alright, because over here we have passive. Then what we are doing is that because we are treating this as a passive, right, the item as a passive, so we have to first cast the item as a passive. Otherwise, we will not be able to access the data inside the passive. But then when we cast an item as a passive, what if this item is empty, or if this item turns out to be a weapon? If you try and convert an item that is not a passive into a passive, this will give us a null. And when this gives us a null, we will get null.data over here, which is what gives us a null reference exception. So to prevent this from happening, we just check whether this p is null first before we actually do the check for p.data. And the same thing over here. It's just a minor bug fix to these two get functions. If you recall, in part 15, the get function is responsible for finding us a particular copy of a weapon or a passive. So once that is done, we have the new play inventory script with everything fixed. So this is just a run through of the fix. Again, you can find details inside the forum post. I will not apply these fixes for now because later on we're going to make more changes to the play inventory script, and I'll run through all these other changes as well. So it's going to integrate all the changes that we have from here. And in this video, we're going to show you also a snippet of the entire script, and then we're going to highlight the parts that are changed. And then of course, we're going to highlight the parts that are deleted as well, like the old functions that are no longer needed. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is, once we have fixed this bug, I thought that we should go one step further and just improve the level up UI as well, because we have a couple of issues with the level up UI. First issue is that if you have the level up UI here, if I try and change the size of the window, if it gets too small, then the UI gets cut off, which is not great, right? The second issue is that if you look at in Vampire Survivors, for example, right, sometimes it shows 3 items, sometimes it shows 4, it depends on what your luck stat is. We don't factor this into the equation, so I'd like to do that as well for our level up screen, since we are recoding and improving upon it. And then third, our level up interface does not show us the level of the item, so this is also a problem, right? And by recoding this, because later we're going to code it in a modular fashion, we are also able to integrate in a future part. Whenever a passive or a weapon contributes to weapon evolution, you will see in the game it shows you the icon of the weapon or the passive that evolves. And then finally, most importantly, right, why we are redoing this whole thing, the code right now is very non-modular. Why is it non-modular? Because it's very tightly knitted with our play inventory code. And whenever you have code that is very tightly integrated with something anything else inside your program or your game, problems can happen. So let's talk about modularity over here. Okay, what is modularity? Modularity is basically the idea that whatever you do, right, whatever component that you create, it has to be as adaptive as possible to different situations. Let me give you a very simple example of what modularity is. If you look at this mouse over here, right? Okay, this mouse over here, I can just plug this mouse, the USB connector, into any computer and it works the same as it does in my computer. So this is modularity. So this mouse is a complete piece of hardware, right? So it works anywhere as long as it can plug into the correct component. So ideally, when we create components in Unity, for example, play inventory is a component, and then you have things like, for example, your rigid bodies are a component, box sliders are a component as well. These are all coded modularly. Modularly means that you can move them somewhere else and it will still work. So whenever you create a script inside C#, particularly because it is an object-oriented language, you will want it to be as modular as possible. And right now, our level up screen is really not modular because it's just so tightly integrated with the play inventory script. If you remove this screen from the play inventory script, it just doesn't function at all. And we want to rectify that, you know, because in the future, let's say if you want to make the level up apply to your treasure chest as well, for example, you pick up a treasure chest and it's gonna open the upgrade screen. If you want to be able to do that, then this upgrade screen has to be decoupled with your play inventory script. So because of that, we want to code everything modularly. So this is why we are recoding the entire level up screen. Okay, number one, to make it adaptive, and number two, to make it modular. So in the article, right, we actually made a duplicate of this game object over here, but I just edited it directly. But for you, it might be safer if you duplicate it and then call it new, and then you disable the old. Okay, I think this would be a better way of doing things so that you don't overwrite the old configuration in case the new one breaks. So to start off, we're just gonna make this whole thing adaptive first. And the first step to making a UI component adaptive is to, before you even split the anchor, right? First thing you will see is that if you try to resize it, everything breaks. So this is really not adaptive. So why do we want to make it so that we want to try and resize it? Because later on, to make it adaptive, we're gonna have to split the anchor. Splitting the anchor is basically just so that when you change the size of the screen, the component changes as well, right? So if you cannot resize the component without breaking it, then you cannot split the anchor, because when you split the anchor, it's gonna resize this element anyway, and this will break the element. So we're just gonna rearrange the element in a couple of ways to make it so that it becomes adaptive, and then we're gonna split the anchor. All right, so the first thing we want to do is to, do you see this background over here? So the first problem is that when we resize this container, the background doesn't go along. And you're gonna have to move this background into the holder over here and add a component called the layout element, right? Because what happens is that if we do not have this layout element, the background is gonna become a part of the vertical layout group. What the vertical layout group does is that it just basically lays everything out vertically. So whatever components I have, they all just laid out vertically by default, right? And if we add the background into it, then this becomes a part of the vertical layout, which is why it appears below all of them. And notice that you cannot change the X and the Y values over here. So if I were to do an ignore layout over here, you will see that now this becomes possible for me to change the width and the height and the position and everything. Yeah. So instead of changing the position, I'm just gonna now stretch this. Okay, so once I add the layout element, you will see that I'm able to position the background to cover the entire element, so that I can just scale the whole thing together. Alright, background and border. But once I do that, notice the background also covers the border. So what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna just copy this image over here. I'm gonna paste this on the background component over here. So I'm gonna put the background in the holder, and I'm gonna change the holder, the background element itself, to show the border instead. So I'm just swapping things around. This will be sliced and multiplied 3. So once I swap the image elements around between the background and the holder, you will see now the border appears in front and then the background appears behind. So now the background is actually responsible for the border over here. And then when the background is there, you will find that the buttons become unclickable. And this is because the background is now blocking all the buttons. So I have to make sure that whatever background I have to uncheck raycast target as well, so that my buttons remain clickable. You should see there's some small reaction on the button itself that shows you that the buttons are still working. If the background is not raycast target unchecked, it's gonna prevent you from clicking on the buttons in some instances. So once we've done that, you will see that now everything scales fine. If you select the parent element and scale, Everything kind of scales fine, but you know, the buttons are still giving us problems because if I scale it down, the buttons are still expanding beyond the boundaries. For that, we will have to go to the vertical layout group on the holder and check control child size. And then let's set a small padding on the left and right as well. That will give us, you know, some border at the sides. And I'm gonna set the child alignment to upper center as well if you haven't done that already. And this allows us to scale everything like that. Okay, so if you want to also, you will see now it doesn't scale the button size vertically. So I'm gonna check also control child size and child force expand. Later we're gonna uncheck these fields again so that now when we scale the element, you know, we can see it be responsive. So one thing you'll find is that once we have all these things checked, actually we still have some problems here. If I scale this down, you will see that the text will overlap with the icon and so on and so forth. So next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna have to make the buttons responsive as well. And for that to happen, we will have to do a slightly different thing. I'm trying to arrange it so that we have the image at the side, and then the title at the top, and then the description at the bottom. And notice also all the anchors are split. I'm gonna show you what this means later on. Okay, so I'm just gonna go to one of the buttons over here. So you will see the buttons over here have background, description, name, option button, right? I'm just gonna move these things around. I'm gonna move the icon all the way to the side of the screen over here. I'm gonna have it take up 20% of the screen. So I'm changing the anchors directly over here, but you see that when I change the anchor, this anchor of the element actually changes as well. So I'm gonna set the Y to 0 and 1 so the anchor stretches across the entire element over here. Next thing I'm gonna do is set left, top, right, and bottom to 0. So you will see that this whole element covers the 20% of the left hand side of the screen. And then for the border, I'm gonna do the same thing, just make sure it's stretched. And icon, same thing. I'm gonna make sure that it's stretched as well. Okay, later on we'll do a couple of things to fix the stretching issue. Alright, so once we've got it to populate 20% of the screen, next thing we want to do is to grab the background sprite and then let's just add a square to it. And this will give me preserve aspect, which forces the image into a square. It doesn't always force the image into a square, but a square is, you know, it's even in the width and the height, right? I'm gonna do this for the border as well. I'm gonna set the image type to simple and then preserve aspect, again to force it into a square. Icon, same thing, preserve aspect forces it into a square. So for the icon, probably I also want to introduce a little bit of margin at the sides so that it kind of doesn't touch the borders of the icon. Then for the background over here, what I'm gonna do is you will see that in certain sizes, the border of my icon touches the borders of the button, right? If I were to say expand this, in certain cases, it might not touch the border, but you know, it either touches top border or the left or right border. So to fix this, I also want to go to the background, the parent object over here, and just introduce a slight margin on the left, the top, the right, and the bottom. This is to make sure that no matter how I size the holder, it does not touch the sides of the box. So these are just little tricks that you can apply to almost any Unity project that you have, and this will work to make something responsive. It's not the best. Unity has a new UI system called the UI Toolkit, which actually works better, but we will explore that when Unity 6 comes out. Next thing I want to do is to grab the name over here, and again I want to split the anchor, and I want to do it by modifying the anchor value over here instead of modifying the anchor by pulling it directly, because it's less accurate if I do that, right? So because the image takes up 20% of the screen, my title is gonna start from 20% and go up to all the way to 100%. So it goes like this, and I'm gonna also get this to go from 20% of the screen like that. So I may want to move this lower a little bit actually, so that you know it doesn't touch right at the edge. And then again, I want to set left, top, right, and bottom to 0. And very important, you want to make sure that overflow here is set to overflow so that the text always appears. Otherwise, if your box is too small, then the text disappears. If over here this is set to truncate. Okay, very important over here to set this to overflow. Okay, I think everything is great now, so I want to align this to the left as well. And I think everything looks great over here, and the font size is fine. Maybe I want to reduce it a little bit, and then upgrade description, same thing. Okay, just want to play around the values until the anchor goes to the places that I want it to go. So 0.2, and then this will be 1, and here this will be 0 to 0.7, right? And this will be the upgrade description. Set left, top, right, and bottom to 0, and then you will get something like this over here. I want to stretch, of course, the text space to cover the entire space of the anchor. And if this affects you and you don't like that, you can just introduce a little bit of space between the top and bottom sections of the text, and then of course reduce the font size a little bit and introduce some border at the sides. Okay, so I'm gonna have a border of 5, 5. Same thing for the title. So we end up with something like this, and this allows us more space for the upgrade name and the description to work with. So later on, we're gonna add the evolution over here in the next part of this series. And we're also gonna add one more element at the bottom for the level, and this level text is going to show us the level of the item, or if we have never had this item before, this is going to show us new. So over here I'm going to move the background a little away from the bottom by moving the anchor upwards. So instead of having this occupy 100% of the vertical space, I'm going to have it occupy only 80%, and bottom here will be set to 0. And then once that is done, I will just add a new text mesh pro into the button right here. And this will be the level, and this will say level 1, font size will be say just something small, right? And center line, vertical line, and I'm gonna again speed the anchor, set everything 0, 0, 0, 0, and just move the text to the bottom of the icon. So we can actually align it to the top. I think that makes a bit more sense. And we can also just add a little bit of bottom margin, maybe 5, and top margin of 5. And left and right, let's say a margin of 5 as well. Okay, so what we have here then is the level at the bottom over here. And we have the whole thing being responsive. So if I change the size of the holder, you will see that this thing adapts accordingly to the size of my screen. Okay, so this is again still not ideal, but you know, now we have the whole thing responsive. You might want to play around with your settings a little bit. Just make sure that whatever you do with the layout, just fit the anchor, and then if you resize the element, you will find that this actually works pretty okay. So with that done, the button is responsive. So we have background and the buttons and everything. The next thing you want to do is to grab this game object and then split the anchor for it as well. Again, I like to just type the values in, and then I want to see where the anchor goes to see how much space this whole thing takes up. So this is going to take up 80% of the vertical space and 50% of the horizontal space. So I'm just going to set the anchors as follows, and I'll set everything to 0, and you will see this whole thing stretch out to take up a certain portion of the screen. So with the anchor split properly and the whole element made responsive, you will see that if I change the size of the window, this whole thing adapts. Okay, which makes it a lot more versatile, right? A lot more robust. So now that I have this, right, you will find that at certain screen sizes, everything still kind of breaks. So if you want to make a fix for that, you can also go to your canvas element, and then just under the canvas scaler here, you can set this to scale with screen size, and then you can set the reference resolution to kind of control the whole resizing a little bit and make sure it doesn't go out of control. Okay, so we have a rough skeleton of our new upgrade window, which is adaptive, which is great. Couple of limitations we have: you can't really do this for mobiles. Then the other limitation is that if you were to try and make this whole thing look better on mobiles, then if you were to go back to landscape view, right, you will see that everything will break again. So we just have to make do with what we have, which is right now this is designed for a horizontal screen. So just prevent the player from playing this game on portrait mode. And this can be done in a couple of ways. You can go to build settings. I don't have Android installed here, but if you go to the Android export settings, there's an option for you to select whether the game can play on portrait or not, and you just gotta uncheck the options. So now that this is done, the next part for us will be to create a script for the UI upgrade window, right? But before we do that, we have to streamline access to the level data of an item. What does that mean? That means that because we are going to be dealing with items as not really a generic type, but as a superclass. Okay, so what this means is that when we are writing our script for the UI upgrade window, right, we will, instead of managing weapons and passives separately, we're going to manage them all as items. But to do that, we have to be able to get the level data of the item, which is currently not possible. We have to convert the item data into either a weapon or a passive before we can get the level data of an item. And the reason for that is because if you look at the item data script, there is no get level data function. Alright, but inside the passive data script, there is a get level data here. And inside weapon data, there is also a get level data function over here. And the get level data function works to basically give you the stats of their weapon in that particular level, and the same thing for the passive. But the reason why they work differently is because passives manage different set of stats, because weapon stats are different from character stats, right? And the passives will boost the character stats, and therein lies the problem. If we were to try and implement this for item data, we will not be able to do it, because does the item data return weapon stats, or should the item data return a passive modifier? This is the problem. But then if we want to manage our items in our inventory as items instead of as weapons and passives, we have to find some way to sort it out. And the reason we want to do that is because we don't want to be repeating our code multiple times. Because if you look at this, right, if we have to convert the item data to a weapon data or passive data before doing get level data, we have to repeat our code multiple times. And you see the logic is more or less the same. It's just that, you know, there's just slight differences in the text over here and over here, right, which is not a very ideal situation to have. Okay, so the solution to this is to make a couple of changes to the item class so that we are able to add this getLevelData function onto our item. And it is done as follows. Let's go to item over here and then let's add a class. This class is going to be called levelData. It's going to be serializable and it's basically going to contain a name and a script. So what this levelData is going to do is it's going to serve as a parent class for the weapon stat as well as the passive modifier, which is right here. Okay, so I'm going to have to change this to class. This will inherit levelData, and this will take away the name and description because we define inside here. Then we're going to move to weapon as well. And then from the weapon here, we're going to remove this and set this to class. This will be levelData, right? What this does is that this creates a common parent class for stats and modifier. And then this allows us to go back to item over here, levelData, right? So when we go back to item data, we're able to create a new function over here that returns item levelData. And let's make it abstract as well. And then get levelData. So what this does is that now we have a parent definition for get levelData, which is separately defined inside the open data class. Right now this will have to return item levelData and no longer return the original variable type. But because a weapon stat is also a levelData item, an item levelData, so we can have this as a return value but return weapon stats. Then same thing for passive data. Gotta do an override here, and then this will return item levelData. So you see now we're able to kind of create a parent definition for getLevelData so that we can use getLevelData inside the item level. So that means that we can do something like this now with the changes that we have made. So the next thing I want to do is now that we have made these changes, because now the getLevelData function actually returns levelData, right? This creates a couple of errors in our code and we have to go back and rectify these errors. Why? Because we are dealing with weapon stats in weapon, for example, right? But then you will see here getLevelData used to return weapon stats, but now it returns item levelData. So we have to cast this to weapon stats. Because it's inside a weapon class, so we can just use stats. And under passive, we have a similar situation over here. We've got to cast this to modify, passive modifier, right? So we can just bracket this because we're just casting the result of getLevelData into a passive modifier. And the next error that we have over here, we don't have to worry about because the next error we have over here will involve the changes to the the play inventory script. I am just going to copy the UI upgrade window script over here in the article and just drop it into a new script here. Then I'm also going to copy the play inventory script at the bottom and drop it into my play inventory script. And I'll explain the changes after I've copied and pasted everything. But once I copy and paste everything, then we should get all the errors going away. And for us to get this working, I'll just have to go to our upgrade window here. I'm gonna uncheck just to hide, and then width will remain checked. And then I'm gonna add the UI upgrade window over here. And once that is done, I am going to have to delete the other upgrade options and create a new text mesh pro here, and this will be called tooltip. This tooltip will be, you can insert a tooltip over here, center a line, and then reduce the font size. So this tooltip is going to be for, you know, when you level up, it's going to say like this stuff over here, right? The luck stuff. So we add that tooltip over there, and then we can go to the upgrade window script that we have, and then just drop the option and the tooltip. Okay, another option is if these are blank, you can also just name this upgrade option and name this tooltip. And then what you want to do is just, if you just add the script, automatically it tries to find the correct elements for you. I'll explain how this works later on, but if you put the correct name over here, it will just automatically populate the tooltip and the upgrade option template for you as well. Okay, next thing I want to do is inside the button. So how this is going to work is the script that we have is going to take this first button as a template and duplicate as many buttons as we need to show the upgrade window. So what's going to happen here is that there are actually some paths at the bottom over here, and these paths are for access to the icon, the description, the name, the button, as well as the level text. So then whatever the name of these children elements have to correspond with the paths that you have inside the script over here. So for example, this icon path, I'm gonna have to rename this to icon, and then this is gonna have to be called item icon. So either you change the name of your elements inside the button, or you change the name of the paths over here. Okay, whichever you want. Next important thing is you've got to set the max options that we have for the upgrade screen, as well as the color of the new text. This is going to be, I'll show you how this works later. So you have yellow text and white text as well. After all this is set up, I'm just gonna go to the play inventory script and then just move the UI upgrade screen over here. Alright, so whenever the player levels up, the play inventory is going to pass a list of all available upgrades to the upgrade window, which will show the upgrade window. So this, because now the upgrade window is separated from the inventory, right? Later on when we have treasure chests, for example, this will allow us to also hook the treasure chest onto the level up screen if we need it to allow the player to level up and all that stuff. Alright, so if you hooked everything up properly, if I were to level up now, you will find that the options will appear, and if it doesn't, it means that I missed an error somewhere. So the error is caused because if I would get level data for level 1, this is going to be 1 minus 2, which will give us minus 1, and because this is an array, it does not take minus 1 as an index, which is why the error occurs. So I just have to make a check and see if level is less than or equal to 1. I'll just return the base text of the passive, and in the case of weapons, I'll just have to do a check over here that says if level is less than or equals to 1, return again the base text. Okay, so this is going to be pretty basic over here, and this will fix the issue, and then I will be able to see the options appear when we level up. Okay, so let me just explain how this entire script for the UI upgrade option works. We have seen over here all the options, right? Let me just explain the max options, new text color, and level text color. Okay, so the first thing you will find is that when you level up now, you will get to see which options are new and which options are existing. So for example, all the options are new here. If I click on hollow heart here, but you see once I have an item existing and I get an option for it, it's gonna show level 2 instead of new. So this new text is basically set right here, and then the color, and then the color of the level text. So everything is settable, so you can make the upgrade window very customizable in a very easy manner as well. So let's just run through the code. Okay, the code basically only has a couple of functions. Okay, so the important thing over here, the code has a couple of components. So whenever I read through code, okay, the code that I'm sharing with you on the blog or on this video is going to be commented, so you can pause the video and then read through the comments to kind of get a sense of what's going on. Okay, I'm not going to go through the variables because the public variables are for you to set, and the private variables are basically there because we have to store some state information regarding the upgrade window. Okay, so the most easy way for you to understand what the code does is, of course, to read the comments, but also to look at the functions that are involved in getting the whole thing to operate. In most cases, for codes, you want to look at the update function, because the update function usually contains most of the logic that makes the game object function. But in this case here, because upgrade window is reliant on some other component to get itself to work, right? The most important function here is actually set upgrades. Because set upgrades basically takes a play inventory, takes a list of possible upgrades, it picks 3 or any other value, and then it also can optionally show a tooltip. So this is the most important function, because in the play inventory script, right, we basically remove the upgrade options and then we replace it with the upgrade window. And more importantly, right, in the changes that we discussed earlier, right, where we changed the apply upgrade options, we also removed the codes to populate the upgrade window, and as well as all the other functions over here that were part of the old system of populating the upgrade window. What happened is, instead we have a new section over here that does a couple of things. The main thing is that it just goes to the upgrade window and it sets the upgrades, and then the upgrades that are set are basically, this is the play inventory, right? This is which inventory you should apply the bonuses to, because in the future, if this game were to go multiplayer, then we will have multiple play inventory. So we will have to make sure that the upgrades are set for a specific play inventory. This is the available upgrades that we calculate above, and then these are the number of options over here. Okay, so either you have 4 upgrade options, or you have 3 plus a tooltip that says increase your luck stat for a chance to get 4 items. Also, there's one more provision over here. Okay, if there are no more available upgrades, then we will just end the level up, so that we don't get stuck in the level up screen when we have no more upgrades to receive. So this is the change, and basically this tells us that the most important function that we have in the UI upgrade window is the set upgrades function. Okay, so you might be wondering why we have 2 ways to set the number of options. So this max option here is a hard limit. So if I set the max options to 4, then that means that the window can take no more than 4 items. 4 items will fill up the entire thing. If I set this to 6, for example, right, then the options will always make space for 6 options. Right? So the max options here basically kind of controls the height of each button, because if I have 4 here, then each button will take up 1/4 of the screen. This parameter here actually allows us to select or show only, for example, if I have max options of 4 and I have 3, I want to show 3 options, then basically you'll see each option will take up 75% of the screen. So this argument over here does a different thing from the max options option that we see in the settings under the component. So in the code itself, what it does is that basically it calculates how many options to show, and then what it does then is that it checks, because we only have 1 button, right? So the code is responsible for duplicating the buttons, right, and then hiding and showing the tooltip as well, okay, which we'll get to later on. Okay, so over here, this is the hiding and the showing of the tooltip. It's just gonna update the tooltip template game object with the tooltip that we have passed inside the function, and then basically it will decide whether to show the tooltip or hide the tooltip based on whether the tooltip has any text inside. If the tooltip has no text inside, this will be set to false. Alright, this whole thing is a conditional logic, right, which evaluates the true or false. This whole thing works. Okay, so this logic here, it's just a way of getting the game object to hide or show without having an if-else condition. And then finally, what we do is that we will look through all the upgrade options, and then we will look through the possible upgrades. And then what we have here is that if we have a valid upgrade, then we will just show the upgrade inside the upgrade window. And then here, all the code here is just to insert the name text, the level text, description, the icon, and the button. Okay, so you're gonna have to read through the code and read through the comments and kind of get a sense of how the logic works. It's really hard for me to explain all of this stuff. It's not gonna really help you if I go into the details. You just have to read the code yourself and try and understand the logic that's going on. And if you have any questions regarding this, you can always go to our forums, and then you can highlight the section of the code that you have questions with, and I will be happy to answer your questions in the forum. The link to the forum is in the pinned comment of the video. Okay, right at the end of set upgrades, you will find there is a function called recalculate layout. And what this does is, this function, what it does is it basically controls the height of each of the options. Let me show you what I mean by this. So if I were to change the size of this, you will see that the height also changes, even though inside our holder, we don't actually set the height option for the vertical layout group. And the reason for this is simple. It's because if I were to do this, you see that the spacing sometimes goes off. Okay, if I were to hide and show the options, sometimes it just doesn't come back right. If I hide options, you will see that automatically the rest of the options will expand, cover the rest of the screen, which is something that I don't want to have. So this was why I let the UI upgrade window script handle the spacing for your options instead. So if I let the UI upgrade window script handle this, you'll see that if I increase the max options over here, it will change the option size of each of the options as well. Let me just show this to you. So you can use max options to control the height of each option. You see that? If I increase max options to 6, next time this appears, you will see that the space that we have gets even more narrow. Okay, so this is controlled by max options. This shows you the height of each of the buttons. Okay, so this allows us to play around with the UI upgrade window a lot more, because now we have options that we can kind of tweak. Yeah, so recalculate layout is just there so that every time we set upgrades, we will just recalculate the size of all the buttons. Yeah, all this is logic just to change the size of the height of each of the buttons as well as the height of the tooltip. And basically what it does is evenly spaces out all the buttons and the tooltip. And how this is done is again based on max option. So this is recalculate layout, and then we have update over here. And what update does is it just constantly checks whether the screen has changed, and it does so by having a variable last screen, which you find on top. And this last screen variable over here is what it does is that it just records every time the screen size changes. Then the layout gets recalculated and it records the new screen size. So over here, it just checks if the screen has changed from the last screen. If it doesn't change, then we don't have to call recalculate layout. Okay, simple as that. And awake is just for us to populate some variables. So if you look at the vertical layout here, why do we need that? Because we need to figure out the padding and spacing for each of the items. So we want to retrieve some of the data from the vertical layout group, which is why we have a little variable over here. This vertical layout is used in the recalculate layout function over here. It's just the math, okay, because if I want to find out how much height each of the options have, then I will have to calculate the total height and divide it by the options that we have. And this is what's happening. And then this is just automatically just to disable the button, right, and the tooltip when it first activates. And what this piece of code here does is that it gets the transform component of our game object and converts it to the rect transform. This is so that we can set the height and everything, because if we have a normal transform, the normal transform only has position, rotation and scale. So we have to convert the transform into a rect transform for us to be able to control all the specific values that only a rect transform has. And finally, we have reset. What reset does is, reset basically allows us to, if you notice, when I first add the script to the game object, automatically this is populated. See that? And this is done because I have the reset over here, and what reset does over here, it just tries to find a game object called upgrade option, tries to find a game object called tooltip, and then puts it into these corresponding variables. So if you've set everything up right, then you will find that your upgrade window will work. As for the code, I spent a lot of time writing it, and I've spent a lot of time writing the comments as well. And for you to really understand how it works, you have to go and read the comments. I'm so sorry that I can't really explain the code any better than I already have. So after I finished the first recording for part 19, I realized that there were a couple of bugs that I should address in this part as well. So I've recorded this extra section. So thanks to our patron, Cameron, for finding this bug. This bug basically is that when you collect experience gems in a certain way or in certain configurations, you get multiple level ups, but you only get one level up screen. So I'm going to address a couple of scenarios where this can happen, but before that, let's just, because this requires us to modify our game manager script, so let's jump into the game manager script and make a couple of modifications first to optimize it in a couple of ways. So let me explain what's going on here. Let's just do a quick recap of the game manager script. Let me just open this up. So what's going on in the game manager script is, well, a couple of things. One of the things that the game manager handles is the leveling up of the character. So when you level up, then you get the level up screen, and then you get the options and stuff, right? So the level up screen is of course managed by the play inventory script that we have, but then the level up screen itself, which is the parent of the window, is turned on by the game manager. So there are a couple of issues that I had with the game manager script. So the first thing is that we have two booleans in the game manager script that tracks certain states in the game manager. So we have is game over that checks whether the game is over, and then we also have choosing upgrade that checks whether the level up screen is currently on. So the thing is that this is actually a duplication. Why do I say that? Because you can actually track the state of the game by checking the current state. Let me just show you the game manager in the game itself. So the game manager actually records 4 different states: gameplay, pause, game over, and level up. So this corresponds to these 2 states that the game manager separately tracks. So if we are tracking a state using 2 variables, then there is some redundancy, right? So what I'm gonna do instead is I'm gonna remove these 2 variables, because we can track them by just checking the current state, right? If the current state is, let's say, game over, then the game is over. If the current state is level up, then the game is in a choosing upgrade phase, right? But if I remove these, this will cause compatibility issues with some of the scripts that use these variables. So instead of keeping these variables here, which gives us extra work, right? Because we also have to maintain the state of these variables. Do you see here? It's game over and then choosing upgrade. We have to maintain these variables separately from the states, which is when we expand the code, it's gonna make things messy. If every time you want to track game over, you gotta update 2 different variables, right? It's just messy. Okay, that's why I'm unifying everything. So what we are doing to maintain compatibility with our other scripts, and also if you're using this project for your own game, then you might also use these variables as well. So that's why we are not removing them outright. What I'm gonna do instead is I'm gonna put a getter like that. I'm gonna replace this with a getter, and this returns current state equals to game state dot game over. So we have one line that does this. So once I do this, I can delete this part here. Then I don't need the semicolon here. And the other thing is, again, is boolean choosing upgrade. And then here I'll do a get and current state, game state, level up. So what I've done here, these 2 will replace the 2 old variables here. So this also means that I'm no longer able to set the variables, but then this also frees me from handling these variables in the future. So once I do this, I can remove all copies of wherever there's is game over or choosing upgrade. Yeah, there's no need for us to track these variables anymore, because now it's just checked by checking the current state, which makes our code a little bit more streamlined and a lot easier to handle if you're customizing it in the future. Second thing that I want to change is right here. Okay, so do you see that under the update function, right? We maintain or we manipulate the state and certain depending on the state that is currently in, right? So for example, when the game is playing, it'll check for pause and resume, update the stopwatch, but if the game is paused, then the stopwatch is not updated, right? Makes sense, right? And then we also have game over, where when the game is over, if the boolean is not set, then we will set the boolean previously, and then we will change the timescale to 0, which pauses the game, and then we will play a message over here, and then display the results screen. And then same thing here, if the state is a level up and we are not currently choosing upgrades, then we will again pause the game, and then we will set the level up screen to active. Okay, the thing though, however, is that the update function is expensive because it's running every frame, right? So what I'm instead doing is I'm gonna remove the code over here, and what I'm instead gonna do is as follows. I'm just gonna put a break here so this does nothing, and then we're gonna go over to, we have one function that starts the game over state, and I'm just gonna go here and I'm just gonna move the code right over here. So this is gonna do display results. Now of course we also have the timescale thing, right? We set the timescale to 0 like this. We are moving the code from over here in update, which runs every frame, not very efficient, to the game over function, which only runs when the game is over and runs only once, right? A lot more efficient, right? Same thing for start level up. The code here, it goes here, and I just removed the debug log over here because we have a lot of messages in the console and the game runs. Don't need any more messages, huh? So this helps to streamline our code a little bit more. We try and avoid putting code in update wherever possible, because especially since the code only runs once in update anyway when level up happens or when the game is over. Want to set the level up screen, actually wherever you put it, it should be fine. You don't have to put it exactly where I put it. Timescale, right, I forgot about that. So timescale will pause the game, right? And then when end level up runs, and it resumes timescale. So this is second change, okay, just a minor optimization, the update, so that not so much code runs over there. And finally, if you look at pause game and resume game, right, you see something very weird with it. It's just a little inconsistency that can potentially cause bugs in the future. What am I talking about? I'm talking about over here, change state. Alright, before change state, we record the previous state, and then before we actually change the state over here. And then this only happens inside pause game, it doesn't happen anywhere else. So you'll see previous state is not used, except for pause game. So only when you pause the game and you resume, the previous state is recorded. And well, we kind of don't want that, right? Because this is an inconsistency, it can create bugs. So I'm just going to move this code over here like that. So whenever you change the state, automatically the previous state gets recorded, and this gives us a more reliable way to track what the previous state or the previous screen was. So I'm moving this code here, I'm removing this here. Just minor inefficiencies in the game manager code, and I think that should be about it. Okay, so now that we've optimized our game manager code, let's talk about the next thing, which is to fix certain issues that we have with the game. Let me just show you the first issue. The first issue is as follows, right? I'm just gonna grab a couple of pickup prefabs and stack them together. So I have two blue gems in the same spot. I'm gonna disable the animation just so that they are exactly at the same spot. All right, so now these two blue gems will give me more than one level. It's gonna give me, I think, 2 or 3 levels. Okay, so I'm gonna show you what happens here. I grab the blue gem, and you see I go up to level 3, but I only get 1 level up. That's one of the problems that we have. Again, this is pointed out by our patron, Cameron. Thanks a lot. He's been pointing out a lot of bugs with our code, which allows me to fix it. Okay, so this is a simple fix. Okay, what's happening here is that whenever we level up, right, notice that we turn on the level up screen and then we change the state to level up, and we also pause the game state. Alright, so if you pick up 2 gems at exactly the same time, right, start level up fires twice, but you see that nothing changes, because if this fires twice, then the game is anyway already paused and the level up screen is anyway already active. So there isn't really you can't set an active level up screen to active, right? And this doesn't track how many times the level up screen is supposed to be called, right? So this causes a couple of problems because the level up screen only shows up once. We want, so that if multiple level ups happen, we want to save the state of these multiple level ups. So we have to track, for example, how many times in sequence does the start level up function get called. So what we can do is we can add a new variable called stack level ups inside the game manager. Okay, and then from here we can do a couple of checks over here. Okay, so let me just write the code in Visual Studio and show you how this works. Once we have this integer here, it's going to be private, so it's not always used. It's only used if you have level ups occurring simultaneously. So start level up is called multiple times. Okay, so when that happens, you want to go to start level up, the function over here, and what you want to do is you only want to track the instances where start level up is still called after the level up screen is active. So the logic will go something like this. Okay, so we want to check if the level up screen is already active, then we make a report. How do we do that? Level up screen, we can use the active cell variable right here, check whether the level up screen is active. If it is active, we will just do a stack level up plus plus. This increases the number of stacked level ups by 1. Alright, otherwise we just perform the regular level up. So how this will work is we'll just move this code over here, because if the level up screen is not active, then the code will come here. And if the level up screen is not active, we want to pause the game, we want to activate the level up screen, and then we want to call this remove and apply upgrades message, which spawns the upgrade window, right? So if everything is already active, instead of opening all of these things, we can just increase stack level ups. Okay, why do we want to use this variable to track whether how many level ups do we have? Because when we end the level up, we can check whether stack level ups is a non-zero value. Okay, so if it's greater than 0, then what we want to do is reduce stack level ups and then just call start level up again. So what this does is that if I have multiple level ups in a single frame, then what's going to happen is that once one level up ends, the other level up will start, Alright, so it's a pretty simple solution, but it's a pretty elegant one if I do say so myself. And let me just run this code to test it out. So if everything goes well, when I collect the gems, you should now see there are 2 level ups, okay? So I go to level 3 here, I can pick one item and another level up screen pops up, and then I can pick another item. Alright, so this fixes the stacked levels issue. So in the forums, right, an alternative solution has been posted as well. You can check it out in the blog. There is a link over here. But the solution that is posted here is a little harder to implement. And well, there's explanation for it also, but it's harder to implement and it just takes a little bit more code, and I'm not really in favor of that. The solution is right here. Okay, it's highlighted and everything, and I explain what's going on here, but it's a lot more complex to implement. And it only works specifically for the player stat script, so it doesn't work for other scripts as well, so it's not very modular. Alright, so I would recommend, even if you find this topic, I would recommend you just follow this fix that I just shared with you instead. Okay, so the other issue that you will find is the following. Now I'm gonna just grab the blue gem. I'm gonna delete one of the blue gems. For the other blue gem, what I'm gonna do is award this blue gem, say 2000 experience points. And if I collect this, well, nothing good's gonna come out of it. Why do I say that? Because now I have 2000 experience. This gives me a lot of, I can probably go to level 6 or something, but I only get 1 level up screen and I only get up to level 2. And this has to do with the way that one of our scripts is coded. This time we can't modify the game manager. This time we have to go to the player stat script, which is right here. Okay, so for the player stat script, right, what's going on here is that if you look at what happens in increased experience, because this is where the experience is added, right, you will see experience plus amount, and then you will see level up checker, and then you will see updated experience bar. Okay, so level up checker, what it does is, this is what is responsible for actually leveling up the character. There's some logical issue here that's causing the level up to only happen once. Okay, if you see here, level plus plus just increases the level variable by 1. Alright, so the level increases only by 1, even if the experience is way above the experience cap. Okay, so if you read through the logic, what's happening here is pretty simple. You're just checking if the experience is greater than the experience cap. If it's so, then we can level up. And then after that, we try and retrieve the next amount of experience that you need. Okay, so for every level, you will have an experience cap increase. So for example, from levels 1 to 3, if your starting experience cap is 100, from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3, it'll be 200 because it adds 100 to it. Okay, and then from 4 to 5, the increase is 200, which means that if from level 2 to 3 I need 200 experience, from level 3 to 4 I will need 200 experience, and so on. Alright, so all of this stuff is stored inside the player stats, and this experience cap increase here tells us how much the experience cap increases, which means how much more experience you need to get to the next level. And this is what the code here is calculating. All of this stuff just handles the experience, the level up process, and it does it very well. Okay, what we just need is the following. We just need to check whether the experience after the leveling up is all done, whether the experience over here is still greater than or equals to the experience cap. Alright, and if it's still greater, then I will just do level up checker. This is what is called a recursive function, or a recursive function call. Okay, so what's happening is every time experience exceeds the experience cap, then level up occurs. Okay, so then if a level up occurs and then the experience, after minusing off the experience cap from the experience, if we still have enough experience for another level up, then we will just run a level up checker again. Okay, this is a very simple fix right here. Okay, let me just scroll up right here, but it fixes our problem. Let's test this out and see whether this works, and you will see that this works marvelously now. Okay, so now when I pick up the 2000 experience gem, this brings me up to level 6, which means I get a whole bunch of items. Right, so these are just 2 minor bug fixes that get the experience system working in a less buggy and a more reliable way. Otherwise, you know, the game really works, because it is pretty rare for you to collect 2 gems simultaneously, for example. So then that bug never occurs very often. And if you have set your experience values reasonably, then you wouldn't get multiple level ups that often as well. So these 2 are pretty obscure bugs. Again, thanks to Cameron for noticing and finding these bugs. So as thanks for finding all of these bugs, we have given him a bunch of badges. Alright, so if you find any bugs in the series, I would appreciate it if you tell us about it in the forums as well. It really helps us to fish out, issues with the series so that everyone else can use these set of tutorials and the files that we have to create your own games in a much faster fashion. So the last thing that is talked about in the article is just we want to follow the level up values that, at least for our project files, we want to follow the level up values that we see in Vampire Survivors. So if you look at the Vampire Survivors experience requirement, what's required is actually quite straightforward. So I'm just modifying the level ranges to reflect the same values as the Vampire Survivors series. And finally, I'm going to also go to my pickups, and the blue gem is just gonna have 5 experience. Okay, you can play around with the system and see if it works. Now the experience system with these 2 bugs fixed should be a lot more reliable. That's all for this part. For the next part, we're gonna be covering a different aspect of the UI before we move on to redesigning the enemy spawning system. So we have the inventory slots as well. And the inventory slots that we currently have is very non-modular, right? Because we have an inventory section on the game HUD, and when you win the game or lose the game, you also show all the inventory slots. And every time we have to show inventory slots, we manually code it. But what I want to do instead is I want to have a prefab in the same way that I have this upgrade options folder, and this can be turned into a prefab, right? So you can prefab this and then you can reuse it somewhere else, right? The same cannot be said for our inventory slots as well as inside the results screen. So once we create a proper way for us to display items, we can just prefab this and then just put it inside every section in our UI that requires us to show the inventory. So we don't have to recode the showing of the inventory for every single screen that we have, right? Which makes our lives easier as well. So that's going to be the next part where we recode the result screen. If you tune in, thanks for doing that, and thanks for your support. I love how you guys watch the series and you leave comments and say, oh, this is helpful, it's helped my project and stuff, because this is the kind of comment that keeps us going on, because it's really tedious work, and but when we see that it helps you, it really makes all the effort worth it. So I'll see you all.